Please join me in welcoming introductory remarks from first Professor George. Thank you.
We gather on Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so we say, and we pray, never again. I begin from a conviction that not all share, not all in this country, not all at this university, not all, I dare say, in this room. I do not condemn those who do not share it, for it is a matter on which reasonable people of goodwill disagree. Still, it's my conviction, and so I set it forth so that everyone in this audience can know where I'm coming from. I believe that the aspiration of the Jewish people for a national homeland in their ancient Holy Land is legitimate. I believe in the right of Israel to exist. I further believe that Israel is morally entitled and indeed obligated to protect the safety and security of its people, Jews and other citizens, residents alike. I note that modern Israel has been under attack from the day of its birth. I further note that powerful forces believe that Israel has no right to exist, or no right to exist as a Jewish state, and that powerful nations and organizations have pledged to destroy it with the force of arms, as some have tried to do before. Still further, I believe that a significant measure of antipathy to Israel is driven by the ancient curse of anti-Jewish hatred. I say a significant measure because it is false to say that all opposition to Israel is driven by hatred of Jews. But it is also false to say that none is. Among the reasons I oppose divestment is that a standard applied to Israel that is not applied to other nations, nations on whose records on human rights are by any reckoning far worse than Israel's record, even when Israel's record is viewed in the worst light. When I perceive these double standards, I naturally ask, why? There is no answer to that question that can completely leave out of account the fact that Israel is a Jewish state, something that is not true of, say, Saudi Arabia, Cuba, or China. Having said these things, I also believe that no state, no government, including Israel's or America's, should be immune from criticism. Nor may any state, even for the sake of its national security, legitimately resort to means that are intrinsically evil, terror bombing civilian populations, for example, or employing torture. Although I believe that Palestinian leaders have served the Palestinian people poorly, I also believe that the human rights of Palestinians must be respected, including by Israel. I understand the grievances against Israel, its policies, and while most are debatable, they are not, by my lights at least, utterly without foundation. I have my own criticisms of some Israeli policies, just as I have criticisms of many U.S. government policies. But now, having said these things, I turn to the question of divestment. Double standards applied to Israel are intolerable. If we are to divest, even selectively, from companies doing business there, moral consistency requires us to support divestment in companies doing business with many other nations. Perhaps we should begin with China. Are we prepared to do that? Shall we begin laying out the various ways in which business corporations of virtually every type provide products and services that are used, among other purposes, to support the infrastructure of communist Chinese oppression? And once again, China is only the beginning. The list of oppressors is a long list, one that will be dominated by nations whose records of oppression are far more extensive and less debatable than Israel's record. Compare, for example, Israel with Saudi Arabia. And this takes me to my next point.
Nobody likes bulldozing dwellings or attacking civilian buildings, even when rocket launchers and other forms of military equipment have been deliberately placed in those buildings, hospitals, schools. And we should certainly call for the taking of all reasonable steps to minimize the deaths and injuries of non-combatants where such attacks are deemed necessary. But we should also acknowledge that Israel is, as it has been from day one, a nation whose security is under assault, whose right to exist is denied, whose people live in the shadow of pledges by other nations and by non-state terrorist actors to destroy it. Israelis have been victims of repeated acts of terrorism in their own nation and abroad. Their security needs are real, very real. And their security policies must be assessed morally with these essential background facts and considerations very much in mind. Now, that doesn't mean that all of Israel's security policies or actions pass moral muster. Many are debatable, as I've said. Likewise, territorial claims by the competing sides in this dispute are debatable. But debatable is the key word. Reasonable people of goodwill can and do disagree on questions concerning security policies and territorial claims. Reasonable people of goodwill will here at Princeton disagree about those things. It's a very important debate, a necessary debate. Neither side can legitimately claim that absolutely nothing is to be said on the other side of the question. Now, this is not to deny that there is a truth of the matter or to embrace moral relativism. If any of you know anything about me at all, you know that I'm not quite a moral relativist. It's merely to note what we should all take on board about ourselves and everyone else, and that is that none of us can claim infallibility. We should all do our best to attain objectivity in assessing the moral claims on the competing sides. But for people on both sides, dispassion is simply not possible. Our perceptions will be colored by emotions reflecting deep attachments and allegiances. And yet we must strive for objectivity, and we must listen to each other, and we must debate, recognizing that these debates at least can be among reasonable people of goodwill. In a university worthy of the name university, we avoid to the extent possible identifying the university itself with one side or the other on matters on which reasonable people of goodwill within the university disagree. Rather, we seek to provide a forum for fair, civil, and informed debate that will enlighten everyone who participates and everyone who listens. Now, there are reasons for this. There are reasons for the university playing this role. Powerful, important reasons that go to the very essence of the mission of a university. At least in the case of non-sectarian universities, as Princeton seeks to be, the establishment of orthodoxies on matters on which reasonable people of goodwill disagree compromises the project of knowledge seeking through the vigorous exchange of reasons and arguments, the currency of academic discourse. Moreover, orthodoxies, especially when they are reflected in university policies, mark dissenters from those orthodoxies as outsiders, raising the cost of dissent and incentivizing conformism, especially among students and untenured faculty. This is why, in my opinion, universities, where they cannot always, but where they can, or to the extent that they can, should avoid taking stands or passing resolutions concerning issues in national politics and international affairs on which reasonable people of goodwill within the university and beyond disagree. For the sake of fidelity to their own missions, universities, at least non-sectarian universities, should avoid permitting themselves to develop orthodoxies, permitting themselves to become politicized. Non-sectarian universities like Princeton can contribute to the formation of just and sound public policy. It's not as if, as universities, we have no concern about that. Yes, universities can play a very important role in contributing to the formation of just and sound public policy, whether pertaining to domestic matters or foreign affairs. But they do that not by taking official stands or embodying the viewpoint of one side or another in their internal policies, including their investment decisions, but rather by providing a forum for morally serious, intellectually robust exchanges among people who represent competing points of view. That's a very important contribution to the discussion of public policy, to the formation of public policy. It's not nothing. It's the very opposite of nothing. It's the right way for us to contribute. But it's not a contribution, this vital contribution, is not a contribution that we can make when the university is permitted to become politicized. And that takes me to my next point about divestment. Once we establish the principle that the university can and even should be acting based on political judgments concerning issues of national and international affairs on which reasonable people of goodwill disagree, where does that stop? I believe it does not stop, short of the adoption by the university of a new form of sectarianism, what amounts to a new form of sectarianism. Those with power within the university, the power to get their way on campus in these debates, will feel free, even obligated, to press, why should they not, for the official adoption by the university of views they happen to favor on the range of disputed issues in our public life as a nation and as a nation among the community of nations. A university such as Princeton would now have positions on moral and political issues roughly analogous to the positions it had in its early days as a Presbyterian college on religious issues. And our campus debates would then become, literally, debates, contests, competitions for the soul of the institution. For what sect, political now rather than religious, although at this level, the distinction begins to become very fuzzy. The debates become competitions for which sect will dominate in university policy. I cannot recommend this course. There are some colleges and universities that have already, in effect, resectarianized. Princeton, to its credit, has not been one of them. We've done a pretty good job, on the whole, of avoiding the politicization of the institution and avoiding the consequences that would have for our intellectual life as a community. We would, I believe, be serving ourselves and our posterity very well by keeping it that way. Thank you.